Hey guys, be sure to press subscribe. I got a great story to tell you today. It's a World War II story. My dad was aboard this ship when this happened, which makes it even kind of a cooler story. But it's a story about the USS Ward. The USS Ward was the ship that actually kind of started the war with Japan, as far as firing the first shots on Japan. It sunk a submarine near Pearl Harbor on the morning of Pearl Harbor. Okay, and it's in the movie Tora. You'll see it in the beginning. Okay, but my dad wasn't on that ship when that happened. He joined it later. He was actually, I believe it was called a high-speed transport or something like that, and it became that. During World War II, I believe it was a regular destroyer or something. But anyway, I'm not sure. I think it was a 4-stack destroyer, and it became a 2-stacker or something like that later on. Anyway, that ship later on went to the Philippines, and somewhere between Pearl Harbor and the Philippines, my dad got on there to be transported someplace else. Okay, and he was on there, and he had told me a little bit of this story, but I had read up on it and found out more and did all the work on it. And what happened was the ship was traveling off of Ormoc in the Philippines, and it was delivering army troops to, I believe it was to Leyte and to some other islands. And what happened was a kamikaze hit him on December 7th, 1944. And then what happened was they started offloading people there, okay, because the ship was on fire. It was hit amidships by the kamikaze pilot. So it didn't sink the ship, okay? But anyway, there was a captain from another ship that pulled up to rescue all the guys that were on that ship and took them onto the other ship. And what happened was the captain of that ship was the same captain that was on the Ward during Pearl Harbor, okay, but he had gotten onto it. He took command of another ship. So he looked at the ship. He didn't want to fall into Japanese hands or anything, and he saw that, maybe they would try to do something with it. Who knows, whether they would take whatever was remaining on the ship or whatever. So he decided that he was going to sink it because it was a World War I ship. It really wasn't worth fixing. It was way too much damage. It was probably beyond repair, he decided. And he decided to sink it. Okay, so it was kind of a funny story that a former captain had to sink his own ship in the end, and I just found that kind of interesting. But anyway, it was sunk off a Ormoc, and it was just found just recently. It was also found in December, which is kind of funny. But it was found, I think it was like in 1,000 feet of water or something like that. I'm not sure how deep it was, but anyway, I know it was found, and I saw the videos of it, which was kind of cool. I'm not sure if there was any deaths during that. I recall my father saying that there was one death on board, or a couple guys, because he mentioned to me, and maybe I'm getting my stories confused here, but he mentioned something about a guy being buried at sea and them attaching some shells or something like that, and they sunk the bodies to the bottom. And that's how they got rid of some of the bodies, during World War II, because they couldn't take them back on a ship. There just wasn't room, space, and stuff like that, so they buried them at sea, okay, and that's the way they did it, But it was just kind of a cool story, guys, and the fact that my dad was on there and he had told me the story. And my father was telling me a story that the captain on the USS Ward, now remember, he wasn't like a regular, he wasn't attached to that ship. He was traveling on that ship to go to another ship at the time, but he still pulled duty as did everybody. And he said that the captain on board the Ward was kind of crazy about doing drills. And he had done so many drills that everybody was overtired, and people were falling asleep on their watches and stuff. And my dad had fallen asleep on watch, and the captain was walking around on deck and caught my dad sleeping, and he put him in the brig on 3 days bread and water. And my father was friends, I guess, with the cooks on board, which is kind of funny. And he was in the brig, so they would bring him up some water every day, and they would bring him up some bread with butter, and that was what you lived on for 3 days. And in the morning, when they baked the bread, they would bring the fresh bread up, and they'd bring him like a half a loaf of bread, and they'd bring him like a thing of butter, and they'd give him his water or whatever, or a cup. I think they even give you a cup of tea or something like that, or a coffee. But that was all you got. You know, that and the bread. It was for 3 days. And I remember my father telling me that, he says, in the Navy, he says that was like a break from, you know, from all the topside watches and everything. And he says he actually enjoyed the 3 days in the brig because of the fact that he got to sleep, he got to eat really. He says the bread was delicious. He says it was homemade bread, you know, and he says his friends would stop by and talk to him for a few minutes or something like that. They'd stop by the brig, and it was just kind of interesting that my father said that he actually liked the 3 days in the brig because it was better than doing his regular duties. And I think for that time when you were in the brig, I believe they stopped your pay. I'm not sure. I know at some points in Navy history they wouldn't pay you if you were in the brig or something like that. But my father said he didn't care. You know, like I asked him about that. He says he couldn't recall whether they paid him or not. But he said that he just enjoyed the 3 days. And then he says he felt good for the next month or so. By the time he showed up for his next ship, he felt like he had a good 3 solid days rest, and he was ready to roll again and, you know, get back into action again. But just an interesting story. I thought people would enjoy that about the captain having to sink his own ship, you know. And if I hear any more stories about that, guys, I'll try to share them with you, because I think these stories are slowly disappearing from people. And a lot of people still have a lot of World War II stories that they've heard from their dads and from their grandfathers and stuff. And we tend not to pass those stories along. And they're great stories to pass along, you know. I mean, I know my dad was here in the Philippines, and also my grandfather was here in the Philippines too. And he fought at some point in the Philippines, and he also fought over in Europe. And he told me some great stories when I was a kid too, you know. And guys, pass those stories along if you have them from your father or your grandfather or whatever. Don't let those stories die, because they're history, you know, and they're family history also. But the USS Ward is a story that should never die, you know, because it's a very interesting. It was the one that took, you know, that sunk the first submarine near Pearl Harbor. It sunk it that morning, and it's just, you know, the fact that it sunk off of Ormoc in the Philippines here is an interesting story, and it's even more interesting that the captain sank it, you know, that was on that ship before. So, but anyway, guys, be sure to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the little story there. I might have some other stories. I want to pass a great story about Fort Drum, and that has I've been out to Fort Drum, and it's really interesting. You can watch my videos on that. I didn't talk too much about Fort Drum, but I want to talk about the history of Fort Drum, because Fort Drum has a lot of history, and it's a really beautiful piece of history here that goes along with Corregidor and stuff like that. They were the last people fighting in Manila Bay. I mean, when the Bataan Death March started, they were still fighting out there, you know, because they hadn't heard the news yet. They were like the last ones to hear the news. They were the last ones fighting. And when they finally got captured, and they were punished a little bit more harshly because of the way that they were fighting, you know, and they were not giving up. So they were punished more harshly by the Japanese. But I'm going to tell that story someday. I'm going to look up some more, you know, facts on it, so I get the story correct for you. But this story here, like I said, most of it was relayed by my dad. Some of it was online, and some of it was from memory, you know. So I hope I got all the facts straight. I'm pretty sure I did. But guys, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching.